see we ended up 32.9 million was the spend for the full year, and that compared against 36.9 budget. So we were $4 million underspent on our capex budget, and you might recall $3 million of that we've elected to carry forward through to next year through the LTP process. So that's incorporated into the New Year's budgets, and the variations by activity that you can see in that table tie back to the activity report that you've just been discussing. The combined effect of that operating surplus of 7 million and this underspend here of 4, collectively that's approximately 10 million, which we can see the impact of that flows through into our cash position, which was around about $10 million better than budget. And we can see that if you go to page 246, I think is the easiest place to see that, where we've got the net debt position, which incorporates cash as well. And you can see paragraph 80, we closed the year with 154 million was the net debt position, which compared with a budget of 163. So that's your approximately $10 million improvement. That equated to 166%. If you just go down to paragraph, there's a net debt graph a little further down, paragraph 91. That 154 million equated to 166% of operating revenue. So that's a key ratio that we monitor, and that was within the 200% green line strategy, which we were working to for the financial year that's just complete. In terms of next steps for all this is still undergoing audit at the moment, so the figures are subject to that final audit. We haven't at this point had any indication of any material issues from the auditors, but we'll follow that process through, and similar to the activity report, this will be presented to the Audit and Risk Subcommittee 30th of September is the plan.
Excellent. Thanks very much for walking us through that, Ian. I'm going to open it up for questions from elected members. And just before I do that, there was the previous question from Councillor Halliday. So I wondered whether Mr. De Haas or yourself wanted to respond to that first, and then we'll move on to, if other elected members can pop their hands up, we can move on one by one from there.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm very happy to just talk through that question, which was just for the benefit of everyone. The question raised was there is a $660,000 overspend related to the long-term plan, and so the question was asked, is that significant and why? So I'm happy to respond to that. So yes, it is an overspend, absolutely, and we have been transparent about that. And the long-term plan is a significant undertaking. It's a cross-council work program which effectively sets out our budgets and our plans for the 20 years. And once we actually get into that and we start spending money and actually developing that, we get into a point where we can't stop. We still have to develop under legislation a long-term plan. Most of the underspend actually relates to personnel movements. It is such a significant undertaking that we do need to do every 3 years. And to make sure, with the pressures of lockdown in March 2020, you'll recall that whilst we were in lockdown, we had to redo, effectively we did 2 annual plans, and then we lost time and we lost traction on the long-term plan. So we actually had to bring in unbudgeted additional staff resources. We took staff, many people in finance were taken out of their substantive roles and were ring-fenced into a specific long-term plan project team. So we had to backfill those positions because we have to do a long-term plan as well as BAU. And so the workload on staff is just far too much pressure. We can't have people doing a long-term plan in their substantive roles. So those positions were absolutely unbudgeted. But we did what we had to do to deliver on a long-term plan, but also protect the well-being of our staff as well. We also incurred a little bit more costs relating to consultation. In the end, it was the biggest, baddest long-term plan that we've ever done, and we did receive 771 submissions. We anticipated that we could get lots of submissions, and you'll recall we engaged Public Voice to help us with that. So that was unbudgeted. What we also learn is the design of the document itself. This was, our consultation document was extremely big. It was 97 pages from memory. It all had to be designed up. The long-term plan itself is in two parts, very lengthy documents, and with the best planning in the world, our graphic designers end up doing more work than what they originally sort of budgeted to do. And as I said, once we're in train, once we're developing our long-term documents, we actually just have to do the best that we can and reprioritise some spending to be able to afford these overspends. So, look, we've learned quite a lot, and we certainly will budget for more costs in the future. So going forward, our next long-term plan, the model works where you do take people out of their substantive positions. And you ring fence into the long-term plan, because there's a significant number of policies that have to be redone. There's a rating system review. It's pretty much doing everything every 3 years. So we will make sure that going forward that we have sufficient budget for that. But the reasons for the overspend, as I said, were predominantly additional design costs. Because our documents were simply bigger and our designers had to do more changes and more work was involved. We brought in additional staff to address workload pressures and fatigue, particularly when we came out of lockdown. And we also had project management costs. It is a huge undertaking that involves many, many people. Someone has to lead from the front. So we had project management costs that we incurred, as well as public voice that we brought in, and it was an excellent decision to bring them in, given that we ended up with 771 submissions. So, Councillor, I hope that gives you idea on why we were overspent.
Yeah, thanks very much for the comprehensive reply, Mark. And I think to add to that, for elected members to appreciate as well the added pressure of responding to the three waters is just one other example, which pulls on the same team, the same finance team, and others as well involved in responding to those requests for information from DIA. So I see Councillor Elliott has her hand up. Councillor Halliday, I'll come back to you if you have any further questions based on the response. But Councillor Elliott, then Councillor Holborough.
Thank you, Mark, for your extensive response there. And now we have a bigger picture of how this process works and how it can drag on your organisation. So going forward, in future planning processes, how do you flag that another blowout is going to happen when we're mid-process?
Just muted, Mark. We'll just wait for you for a sec. Now.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I thought I'd press that. Look, hindsight's a wonderful thing, Councillor. So we've now got a good idea of what a long-term plan actually costs to deliver. It's actually nothing short of $1 million. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we get the budgeting right. If we budgeted for $1 million in year 3 when we're developing a long-term plan, it's all operational costs. That would be a substantial increase in rate. So look, we've got mechanisms where we can spread that cost over 3 years. So effectively we've got an election reserve. We know that every 3 years we do an election. We know that there's costs, and we actually build up reserves over time. So we'll be looking at that. We'll need to do that. We'll need to make some adjustments in the upcoming 2 years of the annual plan. But effectively we've got to start. We know what we're up against. In 3 years' time, it's likely to cost more. And who knows what challenges we'll have then. So our mechanism that we'll need to start thinking about and bringing to the table when we develop next year's annual plan is start building up those reserves and budgeting for it over the next 2 years.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Holborough.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking up at the other cost increase, which was the legal costs. And I was just wanting a little bit of an explanation around that. It says higher charge out rates and hours required. why do we need extra hours? What's unique about our situation at the moment? Because we have had quite a lot of legal activity in the past. What has increased?
Yeah, so can you hear me? The principal,
Yes, we can.
yeah, the principal items, and behind that there was Kiwi Rail, the case there. There was also costs in relation to Te Urahi, a range of employment advice on top of the normal BAU. But I think probably those two, the Kiwi Rail and Gateway, are the two items that have been signalled to me.
I think Sean has something to add too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, just to add to Ian's comments, certainly the Kiwi Rail, I would think, would probably be the most significant element to those costs, and we are still looking at trying to recover that cost back from our insurer. So certainly the legal costs to date, we are hopeful that we will be able to recover that. But yeah, there has been significant work going on in that space with the litigation that they have been proceeding with council.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that response, Mark. That was great. Look, I'm just a curiosity question on this one. I've got 3 questions, but and it was touched on before. We obviously had a lot of pull on our time with regards to responding to government requests, say around Three Waters, etc. There's obviously a cost associated with that, which more than likely wasn't factored into the budget as well. I'm just curious, do we separate that out anywhere to show potentially what that cost is?
We haven't, well, we're not explicitly reporting it in these reports, but it certainly is, well, the significant components, I guess, are identifiable. So if we think about the work that's been done out of the first tranche of the Three Waters funding, we would be able to track the main items that were spent with that $1 million OPEX that I mentioned. I guess the piece that's not there is the call on BAU staffing time. So my time, Mark's time, my staff's time, etc., is all just buried in the personnel line, and you know, we could assess it if we felt it was warranted. But that's the bit that really hurts, is that our BAU resource is being, you know, is diverted, you know.
Oh, look, I hear you. And I'm just wondering whether, you know, in regards to how the whole process was going to work, simply coming up, it might be an idea to have a running total on something like that, just so the community is inquiring about or challenging us on some of this expenditure. We can actually be pointing to those figures, if you like, that are beyond our control, that are pushed down on government, from government, without that additional funding, if you like, to support that.
Martin, I think I've asked something similar of our chief executive some while back, and I think part of the challenge, and Wayne may or may not want to respond, is you know, it's almost would come to having to keep a timesheet because the staff don't just sit in a room for 8 hours, do that work, and then they're done.
I appreciate that.
You know, it's amongst doing other pieces of work, and it's a couple of hours here and an hour there, and so forth. So I absolutely understand where you're coming from in terms of the principle, but I think from what I've been told in reality, that's it is hard to track more accurately. So
I appreciate that. I just wanted to bring it up.
No, and look, and absolutely good for you to do so as well. You had 2 further questions?
Yep, a couple of other questions. You mentioned the money we got with regards to Three Waters at about 3 million. I was under the impression we got 6.1. I know that the other portion of that maybe is the Greater Wellington Regional Council portion through that. But are we going to receive that at some stage? Is that coming in the next financial year, or is that 3.1 that we've got at the moment as such?
Yeah, no, it is just timing. So there's 3 million in the year just finished, and a further 3 coming in the year that's just commenced. So it's purely timing. And we do have that confirmed.
Yep. Number 21 talks about internal recoveries. Look, my apologies. What is an internal recovery, please?
Sorry, whereabouts are we in the report?
Sorry, number 21. Description includes maintenance and operations, includes maintenance, business as usual, council operating expenses, internal recoveries, grants and other sundry expenses. And I do notice that there is a heading for internal recoveries. A couple of words offhand.
Yeah, so that will be charging internal staff time or internal costs to capital projects. So there's an element of staff time that's dedicated towards capital projects, and we have a charging mechanism to estimate what that is and charge the significant items back to those capital projects.
Cool, I appreciate that. Thank you. The only other thing I wanted to comment was in B, the statement of financial position. I'm just wondering whether it was prudent. This is just a feedback, and take that as you will. If it's a good idea to maybe show our net debt position in that statement as well. I appreciate that it's at table 1 on page 246 in the treasury management side of things, but we just tend to have a lot of people that are very interested, if you like, in our current, whatever our current debt situation is. I think if we had a nice clear, I mean, it's very, very clear at the back, but when you're talking about a statement of financial position, maybe it would be worth having a paragraph on that there, or just, you know, copying the same thing there, potentially.
Yeah. So the format of that statement of financial position, we have to follow accounting standards, and in the end, assets and liabilities need to be disclosed in the different sections, which is why it's broken out in that way. But I agree with your point that what matters in relation to our debt actually is the net position. And so, you know, I'm actually what I'd like to do in due course is just have a little look at the way we structure this report, and perhaps have a more of an executive summary at the front that perhaps brings some of those key metrics forward, rather than having to dig through, you know, through the full detail of the report to find them. But I agree with your point.
Thanks, Ian. Much appreciated.
Right, team. I don't see any further questions up, so last call out for questions. Otherwise, we'll move to the recommendations found on page 251. No, can't see any further questions. So does someone, we've got a councillor that wants to move recommendation 103 and 104. I can only see some of you on my screen. So Councillor Compton and Councillor Halliday. I'm not too sure who came first. And so right of introduction, Councillor Compton. So I'm going to open that up for debate. Councillor Halliday, your hand's still up? No hands coming up in debate, so I'm going to put it to the vote. Use your voting tabs. All those in favour say aye. Let me know when you're ready, Dem Services.
We currently only have 9.
Councillor Buswell's still away, so that'll be...
And the Mayor.
Thank you. So that's passed. Thank you, team. Take your vote down, and thank you, Ian. So now we move on to page number 252, our residents' opinion survey, item number 8.4, and I'm going to hand it over to staff who are going to introduce the representative from the research company that has prepared the report. So over to you, team.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, councillors. You all have received the annual residents' opinion survey report. I'll take that report as read. However, there are 2 key points I would like to bring to your attention. One, obviously, is overall the adjusted satisfaction this year was 74% compared to 80% the year before. And also the majority of this decline occurred between quarters 3 and 4. That decline, we believe, is largely related to the perception of rates, the perception that council makes good decisions, and the trust in council for doing the right thing. I will now hand over to Liz Morley, Account Director from Research First, who will take you through a series of slides that will explain the report in more detail. Thank you, Liz.
Good morning, Liz.
Good morning, everyone.
I'd like to thank you for inviting me to present at your meeting. If you're happy with this, I will take questions through the chair at the end. I will give you a quick overview of, first of all, we shall start, hold on, just make sure. So can you all see the slides, just to check?
Yes.
Yep, perfect. Excellent. Okay, so your resident survey takes place throughout the year. We have 4 survey points where we talk to 200 residents at each survey point to give us a sample of 800 residents over the year. So this is our recommended approach for resident surveying for councils. There's a number of benefits to doing it this way, and some councils do their survey on an annual basis. The benefits of doing it quarterly is that you get a regular feed of insights into council on your service and activity areas and how they're performing. And the other benefit is doing it on a quarterly basis means we can remove some of those seasonal fluctuations that we see in data. So things like stormwater, street lighting, if you do those at an annual survey point, the views are likely to be swayed by the season. So in the summer, you'd expect stormwater to perform better than if you interview in the winter. So it's a much better way of doing it. So each of those survey points, we talk to a representative sample of your residents. So that's by age, gender and ward. The interviews that we conduct at the moment are all done by telephone. We have a good database of your region and of your district, and we talk to people by cell phone and by landline. So the skew by the landline dropping, it's definitely something that we need to be aware of. It's something that's coming in more and more, but we do have that cell phone sample as well to be able to contact your residents. So at this stage, we're happy that we're contacting a robust and representative sample of your residents at each survey point. So at each survey point, we provide you with a feed into the council areas as to how each of those areas are performing. And then at the end of the year, you get a summary of those results. So that's the summary that I'm going to present to you now. So overall, as Joe just said, satisfaction is trending downwards at the moment. So you'll see the 80% in 2017, 2018, a slight drop in 2018, 2019 to 76%. So that drop isn't something that we'd call statistically significant. So we'd say, right, you're in line with your normal 80% there. 1920, it was 80% again. So we've seen a consistency in performance. The drop that we get at 2020, 2021 financial year is statistically significant. So we know that something has changed. So we need to look into what has changed. So when we look at those quarterly results, we can see that that drop has happened in the March and June quarters. So September and December, the results were performing as you'd normally expect. We've got 79% and 81% satisfied at those September and December points. March and June, you get a drop to 70% and 65%. That 65% is the lowest that we've recorded as a satisfaction level for a long time for Kāpiti district. So there's a number of possible drivers to that. The Te Huri Capita Gateway project is one of those, and there's the rates increase that was communicated as part of the LTP process. And then there's a pattern across the country as well. So just looking, so this is your quarterly satisfaction results. So one of the things that we do when we see a blip in the results, we go back to your previous data and look at what's happening, see whether it's a normal pattern that we'd expect. So your last 2 survey points, Q3 and Q4, were the 2 that dropped. So normally your results are lower in Q1 and Q4 than they are in quarters 3 and 4. So 3 is normally a good point for you. At the moment, Q3 has caused your scores to drop. So we know that there's definitely something different happening this year. So what's driving that satisfaction? I'll skip over this. I'm pretty sure that these slides will be made available to you all afterwards. So you can read that slide at your leisure, and I'll skip on to explaining what we've done here is to plot the links between how people respond to questions. So the survey questionnaire will ask about each of those service areas separately and ask some overall questions about trust, rates, council making good decisions. And then we have that anchor question of overall satisfaction. So what we're looking at in this analysis is the patterns in how people answer. And say if they are dissatisfied with public toilets, are they likely to be dissatisfied with overall council performance? So we're plotting relative performance against relative importance. So the important quadrant for you to look at here is that bottom right-hand corner. So in that bottom right-hand corner, those are the areas where performance is relatively low, but importance to overall satisfaction is relatively high. So if we look into that corner, it's got things like whether council's going in the right direction, rates, trust, council making good decisions. So what's important to note here is that there were 4 measures in this survey that missed their LTP targets, but these areas are not the problem. So street lighting was one of those. That's up in the top left-hand corner. So it's relatively well performing, but relatively low impact on overall satisfaction as well. Roads allowing for easy movement, that's just snuck in to that bottom right-hand quadrant, but it's not one of the major significant drivers. District development as well, that's just in the bottom right-hand quadrant. Waste minimisation education was the other one that missed its LTP target, and that's over in the bottom left. So it's not a significant driver of overall satisfaction. So that's, if you look in that quadrant again, they're the ones that are your risk areas. So these are the ones that are not performing well, but are driving overall satisfaction. So it's the perceptions of rates, it's the perceptions that council makes good decisions, and it's building trust. So this is the analysis that we've done on your overall year's data. Because we'd seen that difference in the Q3 and Q4 results, we've plotted them separately as well and looked at what difference there is there. So this is the Q3 and Q4 analysis. So what we can see here is that perceptions of council making good decisions, so that one has dropped in relative importance, but not in performance. So that's moved over to your left-hand quadrant area. So that's not a major risk. Your major risk areas are that the council is going in the right direction. So in Q3 and Q4, performance hasn't improved, but that has increased in importance in relation to overall satisfaction. So that's one of the major drivers of that decline. Perceptions of rates and trust have maintained their position. So there's no difference there in how the Q3 and Q4 performance has been, but they're still one of the major drivers that you need to be looking at. We also ask residents a number of open questions and then go back and analyse those results and see what they're saying in there off the kind of front of mind topics that come up. And those also link to this idea that perceptions that you're going in the right direction are kind of tailing off. They're going in the wrong direction. And it's the same areas that come up. It's around rate spend, the visibility of where money's going when rates are increased. It's trust in doing the right thing and making good decisions, again, linked to that rate spend. So if people see spend happening in areas that they're not happy with, that links to a decline in overall satisfaction. So those action areas are really around communication and engagement. And if we look at some of those service areas individually, we can see that pattern happening again. So this chart is showing your infrastructure measures. So it's focusing on roading and access really. So the yellow bar are your results from this year. The dark blue is last year. The pinky color is 2018-19. And the orangey one is 2017-2018. So if you focus in on that yellow bar, you'll see that there's been a slight increase across some of these measures. Ease of movement is the only one that's seen a real drop. Condition of roads, a slight drop as well, but not something that we'd consider significant. So overall, when you're looking at these activity areas, performance is okay. It's doing well. There's increases. But if your overall satisfaction is going down, then something's wrong still. And this is where you see that district development, the clarity of information, the ease of participation and the value for money are all areas where perceptions are dropping. So to achieve those overall improvements, the focus has to be on comms and engagement rather than those physical asset areas. According to residents, the perceptions that residents have, those asset areas are doing well. So just to cover off on some of those key findings, and then I'll take questions if there are any. So after year on year, it says increases here, but I'd say it's more like a year on year stability. Overall satisfaction for council has dropped. And that has been driven by the last 2 quarters of the financial year. So we have got your newest survey has just gone into field yesterday. So one of the things that we'll be monitoring closely in the September survey is whether that drop continues, and it's whether something you need to look at more urgently. So in that survey, there were, for last year, there were 4 measures that fell short of their LTP targets. Street lighting only just missed its target at 84 versus 85%, but this was also an area that was missed in the previous year. Roads allowing for easy movement, district developing in a way that considers its unique character and the natural environment, and waste minimisation education. So those are the ones that missed their targets, but also not the ones that drive overall satisfaction. Your areas to watch then are value for money, involvement in decision making, trust in council decision making, and the district going in the right direction. So now I've gone through the negatives. Yeah, there were a number of key areas as well that exceeded their target, so it's worth giving those a mention as well. Okay, so that's pretty much everything that I wanted to talk about on those results. Through you, Mr. Chair, I will take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Liz, for running us through that. And I am expecting a number of questions around this report, which I think is healthy to discuss and debate the findings. I do want to just check with our Chief Executive. Hopefully Wayne's with us at the moment. One of the key areas in that slide one of the slides that you brought up was around value for money. And I'm interested in how that reconciles with you, Wayne, around the council's position in terms of the second most efficient council in New Zealand. So that the correlation between those two things. And I have another number of other questions myself, but I'll wait till other elected members have had a bit of a go.
Yep, I haven't run the hills, Mr. Chair. I'm here. Yeah, you make the obvious point. And in fact, we're now the lowest in the country operating costs per capita. It's the relative change is what people see. I've quoted this before. The average rates per household in Fielding are $5,000 per house. But people, and in our district, they're what are they, around 3,000 odd. So what people are looking at is A, the debate in the community about what's going on and those people who are opposing various things, and B, the fact that a 3% reduction to the rates increase last year has translated into a higher increase than we would like this year. People haven't really remembered the benefits that we tried to provide them last year with the COVID uncertainty. What they're seeing is quite a large rates increase. What they don't really consider either is the fact that our rates increase was largely middle of the pack across the whole country. In fact, in Otago, it was something like 70%. Now, that was a regional council, so a little bit of a red herring. But yeah, the key point is really what I'm taking for it, jumping ahead to some of the answers, is the more noise you get out there about the impacts of these increases and whether it's fair or not and what it's spent on, the more misinformation that's being spread out there, the more we're actually going to have to consider doubling down on our communications. Because I dispute the fact that our communications haven't been adequate. We have poured far more into that than ever before. But now we're effectively having to double down because there is so much misinformation out there.
Thanks for that, Wayne. So look, team, I'm going to open it up for questions. I do want to remind you to the comment I made in my email there. I think given the level of drop indicated in the survey, and given the fact that we've got a lot on this agenda to get through via Zoom, and the importance of this, that I have discussed with the Chief Executive the opportunity to flesh this out a bit further via a workshop around some of the issues that have been raised, what some of the possible solutions are, and so forth. And so Wayne has come back to me and said that we can look at some options around doing so. I want to make it clear that doesn't mean you can't ask questions now. We'll work through that. But just in terms of being able to have a bit more of a deeper dive, that I think it would be prudent to look at doing that at a later date. So on my screen, I can see Councillor Holborough and then Councillor McCann. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Over to you, Councillor Holborough.
So I think Councillor McCann may have had his hand up first, but I'm first on the list. So just a few questions that wouldn't be coverable in a workshop. For instance, the waste minimisation issue, I think, is something that we could flesh out in a workshop very usefully. But I just wanted to dive a little bit more into the statement that this is not unique to Kāpiti and that there are some drops throughout the country. Could you provide a little bit more information around this? Are they around the same kinds of areas? And are our drops bigger than other councils around the country?
Thank you, Janet. Yep, through you, Mr. Chair. We have done, well, we survey residents across the council across the country for a number of different councils. And we have across those surveys, the most recent ones, seen a drop between this year and last year. The drop in Kāpiti is slightly bigger than some of those other areas, but across the country, there has definitely been a decline. So the other thing that we've done when we see these drops and these kind of these trends across a number of surveys is have a little bit of a deeper look. So we've recently done a national survey of New Zealanders and asked them some key questions around the areas that popped up in your survey, in particular around rates, involvement in decision-making, comms and engagement. So those areas are the ones across the country that are driving dissatisfaction. And we do know that there's a proportion that's around sort of 20 to 30% of people across the country think their council has got worse at those things in recent years. So that doesn't mean that the council has literally got worse. It means that people's perceptions have changed. So it's either that their expectations have risen or that the council's no longer meeting those needs. And that could be a mismatch in how those comms are presented. And we know that that's maybe something that Capita needs to look at, the actual modes of communication that are used. But yeah, as a country, dissatisfaction with local government is on the rise.
Could I just have a follow-up question, please, Mr. Chair? So thanks for that. That really that answers my question quite well. I was just wanting to think about the reasons why that general drop might be happening across the country. We've isolated some reasons why we think it's happening here. For example, the rates increase in Te Uruhi. Was there any kind of comment on water reform and this perception that councils across the country aren't performing in that area and the comms that have been coming out from central government around that? Did that factor at all, or did it fit into the timing of this survey?
Yep, so that was included. We also asked some questions around Three Waters reform programme specifically. Generally across the country, awareness of that Three Waters programme is still quite low. There's a lot of people still haven't heard of it, and only 4% said that they had a good knowledge of that programme. So where infrastructure it's kind of high on people's agendas, it's something that people interact with on a daily basis, it's still not something that's driving overall satisfaction with these local councils. It's up there and it's part of the chat. One of the things that we did as well was a trawl of social media chatter and look at the sentiment that comes through there as well. So the analysis of that showed that the Wellington region are talking about local government and local government areas a lot more than anywhere else in the country. But those areas, I mean, there's infrastructure as mentioned, but it's not one of the key talking points. It's around rates is the one that people are talking about more.
Okay, I think that just leads me to one more little question, which was around the importance. So I'm just not quite clear how importance is measured. For instance, that drop in ease of access around the district, I would have thought that's quite important. Is it because it's not important to people? It's not mentioned by people a lot? What drives the importance scale?
So it's a statistical analysis that we do. So it's looking at relative importance. So it may not be that importance has dropped, it's just relatively less important than some other factors at that stage.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for your report.
Councillor McCann next, and then Councillor Compton.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you, and I've got a number of questions. You mentioned social media chatter. Have you had a look at social media within the Kāpiti district to see what issues have been coming up negatively? I think most councillors would know what they are.
So through you, Mr. Chair, we haven't looked at Kāpiti specifically. One of the slightly annoying things about social media sentiment analysis is that you need quite a lot of data for it to produce something good. So we look at it on a regional basis rather than on a district basis. So we can look at Wellington and make conclusions on a Wellington region, but looking at Kāpiti in particular, I mean, we can have a look at it and see whether it brings anything out, but the quality of our conclusions on that wouldn't be very good, I don't think.
Can I just have a follow-up on that particular question? When you're looking at social media, how are you able to dive into, say, closed community groups? And as you'll know from your research, we have a community that's quite diverse, and each group literally has their own area where they communicate. Does your research, when you're looking at the Wellington region, include those, or are you only looking at what's publicly available?
So we use a number of different platforms for social media sentiment analysis, and they capture a very broad range of platforms that people are communicating on. It's basically a large sifting tool that you can then diagnose the analysis from. So that will go through Facebook groups, it goes through Reddit, it goes through a whole range of platforms. So while it may not be perfect and we can only access legally information that is made public on the internet, it still provides a good indication of people's views, and combined with your resident survey as well, that's how you get that holistic view on perceptions.
Thank you. One of the key points I thought you made is perceptions have changed because the actual reporting on what we're doing in our projects hasn't changed much, but it's the perceptions of how council has made our decisions. We've got a report on the gateway process that's underway. Is that the type of report that you would look at, considering I think most councillors will tell you that this is playing a significant role in how the public view us?
Yeah, that particular project has come out quite a lot in the open comments attached to that survey. So it's high on residents' agenda, and it's something that residents want to be kept informed about and kept engaged with.
Yeah, and it's a comment. Gwyn Compton brought it up earlier in the first part of our meeting that, you know, we need to be looking at the quality of information that's being reported to us in presentations and submissions. There was a great deal of information out in the public arena that was patently false and seen by thousands and thousands of people. What is your advice to councils on how to deal with false information and misleading information?
I think on those high awareness and those areas that are driving high kind of the changes in satisfaction, there needs to be significant management by council and seen response to anything that is in that public domain.
Thank you. And I would hope, Mr. Chair, that we might be able to have this discussion again and bring in externals when we get that report on the gateway.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll wrap all that up at the end, possibly. So, Councillor Compton.
Thank you, and thank you for that presentation. It's really useful. In terms of your research, presumably there's quite a strong link between people not trusting council to do the right thing, around not making good decisions, and their perception of spending money on things that people are opposed to, and that would presumably flow through to whether people think they're getting good value for money out of the rate spend, especially when there are those big increases coming through.
I think that's for you, Liz.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, that link is definitely there. Anything that residents can see as very visible. So if they can see paint put on roads where they don't want paint put on roads, if they can see visible spending in areas where they don't want spending, that is what they see as your council actions. So that is what's driving satisfaction. It could well be that you're doing stuff behind the scenes that they would be really happy with, but it's all based on what they can see.
Cool. And this is, I guess, a follow-up, because it was an interesting point you raised around the sort of core things that people do acknowledge actually working around the swimming pools, libraries, cycle and bridleways, beach access. I noticed that there's not anything around parks and reserves and playgrounds in there. I presume that's something because it's not a measure presumably in our LTP around satisfaction. Is that an area that would be worth us surveying on, given that those are some of the core pieces of infrastructure that councils do provide?
It's definitely an area that other councils have as part of their survey. I'll maybe pass that question to Jo about how it fits within the long-term plan measures.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe there is a separate survey, the park survey. So just keeping in mind that this residents' opinion survey does answer the bulk of our questions, but there are a number of other surveys that we do in addition. And you'll see the results of that come through in the annual report.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Compton. I've got Hanford, then Elliott, and then Pravanov.
Yeah, kia ora, Liz. Thank you so much for that. That was extremely helpful and useful. And if you're wondering why I'm wearing a onesie, Wellington Free Ambulance onesie day today, just so you're not like, what's she doing? Who is this person? But my question is around kind of the comms and engagement point that you mentioned too, and kind of telling that story and potentially finding better ways and more succinct, and I don't know, just some kind of just evaluating, I guess, how we are telling our story about rates and where money's going and value for money and decisions and how we believe they're the right thing, and explaining that rationale. I'm wondering whether through the survey there were many comments from residents about how they think we can do that better. Like, obviously there's some kind of feedback that people aren't happy with how things are being done currently, and part of that does come through the comms aspect of things too, and how we're telling the story. But was there a theme of people giving suggestions, or does that not often come through these kinds of opportunities for people to have their say? Do you find it's mainly an opportunity for people to kind of rant or offload how they're feeling, or do people give constructive feedback about how to move forward? That's my question.
Okay, so through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, we did ask a couple of questions in the survey around communication preferences and current communication models. So there's some information in the main report around how people currently get their information from council, and that focuses around local newspapers, newsletters, the kind of more traditional forms of comms. The question around how they actually want to receive information from council provides slightly different information. So the residents are moving towards email newsletters. They want more kind of internet information. So there is some work to be done there, I think, in matching the current communication model to communication preferences. So that would be one way to make a change. The other thing that we've seen across some other areas around council communications is layout of websites really does make a huge difference to people. There was another piece of work that we've done for Capita recently that's not related to the resident survey, where we had one resident say it's like a treasure map with no X, which I thought was a really interesting way of talking about a council website. So it's those little snippets of information are probably that we pick up here and there, and there's be some stuff in the verbatim comments as well. And it's getting those little nuggets of information out and making sure that they do inform the changes that are made.
Just one really quick follow-up to that too, because yeah, I did note in the report it does kind of show that trend towards more electronic forms of people receiving their information. But do you think it's not just how people receive their information, but what is a part of that kind of package and story? So I'm just wondering if there was feedback as to how people would like to receive that in kind of a, yeah, not so much in the kind of like form that they, not so much in the through the mechanism that they get it in, but what, like the kind of contents of what
the content itself. Yeah, and we don't have feedback on that in particular. I mean, that's something that would definitely be worth digging into in a lot more detail, because a lot of the time perceptions aren't built around the facts per se, they're built around the delivery. So you could still deliver the same program, deliver the same strategy and present it in a way that residents can engage with. You'll probably end up getting different results.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Elliott, and then Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you very much for your report, Liz. I've got to say, in 7 years of being in local government here in Kāpiti, it's not just a bad outcome, it's actually the worst I've ever seen over 7 years. I took a careful look at the adjustment formula that you had there, and I ran that through in reverse against all of the responses, and it made a bad survey outcome way worse. So I'm wondering if that actual formula, how commonly it is used across our sector.
So through you, Mr. Chair, different councils across the country use different ways to report against their LTP targets. The way that councils report is based on how those targets are set. So some councils will remove the don't knows and report the satisfieds and the very satisfieds. Capita removes the neutrals as well and readjusts the base to report just the satisfied people. And there's other councils across the country that remove the don't knows and then remove very dissatisfied and dissatisfied and report anyone who hasn't expressed dissatisfaction as being satisfaction. So it is different. There's not really a huge amount of commonality across the country in how it's reported, but I think that that's not the important thing. The important thing is how your LTP targets are created. If they're created on the basis of that calculation, then that's how we measure. If you were to change the way that you calculate your LTP targets, then we'd change the way that we monitor them. So the two feed off against each other.
Thank you. I think we'll be into some conversation about this after, but thank you very much.
Councillor Pravanov. Team Services, do we have anyone else other than Councillor Pravanov after Jocelyn?
Not that I can see.
Okay, if you do, elected members, pop your hand up so I know who's next. Jocelyn, over to you.
Thank you, Liz, for providing a really good report and providing a lot of context with that today. And I just want to follow up. My question is along a very similar line to what Councillor Elliott has just touched on, and I understand why the adjusted averages or the adjusted scores are actually given, because it's a historical thing, and if you changed it then it would actually make things, there's no comparison. But I don't actually understand how a lot of this is reported. So, for example, on a page, and I don't know whether you've got the whole report there, on page 298, this is the community support services page. It says around 6 out of 10 residents were happy with the community support services. This exceeds targets, and that's 60%. But when you actually look at the little graph below, it says 89% adjusted satisfaction. I don't actually understand how that's 89 when in reality, it's just over 60% when you look at the two blue figures. Could you provide a little bit of an explanation with that, please?
Yeah, sure. So your adjusted figure removes that grey neutral box, which is your 35%. So you're rebasing the population that you're calculating your satisfaction score on. So you're taking out anyone who doesn't have a view and anyone who doesn't know. So by reducing that number, your 6 in 10 suddenly becomes 9 out of 10.
Yes, I understand that, and it's quite consistent. It's about a third of the population, and to me, it's giving a really strong indication, as Councillor Elliott said, is in reality, people are actually a lot less satisfied than what the figures are actually showing. And then, so just to
off,
yes,
just give me a sec. We have covered this topic that you've raised a number of times and responded to it. I'm not cutting you off entirely, but I just want to remind you this is not the first time that we've had this discussion around the adjusted scores. So I'm just not too sure what the value is in terms of kind of relitigating it again. So I just want to remind you of that. It's not the first time it's been brought up or responded to.
Yeah, no, I accept that. But then following on from that, if you look on page 267, one of these graphs that is actually really quite good, looking at the 4 quadrants. In there, if you look down the axis on the left-hand side, it says neutral, satisfied, and very satisfied. And I'm just trying to understand why, if it's been adjusted, that the neutral results have been included in that.
Yeah,
although
so
actually there's several graphs in that area.
Yeah, sorry. So when we calculate for your LTP targets and matching the KPIs, that's why we use the adjusted score. We report all 5 categories as well. So that's what you were seeing on the other graph with the grey box in the middle. So we report that as well for clarity to make sure that people are aware and can see that neutral category in the middle. To be able to do the regression analysis that goes behind these quadrant plots, we need to include that neutral category in there. So it's important to remember when you're looking at these quadrants, we are looking at everyone's scores across. So we've removed the don't knows, but we keep the neutrals in. So also on these plots, the scores are all relative. So it's not, we couldn't put a scale on this and then a scale on the next one on the next page and it would be the same scale. It's plotting relative satisfaction against relative importance. But
okay,
yeah,
thank you.
Neutral in there.
Thanks, Liz. Councillor, did you have any further?
So I do have another question. So you mentioned that the people who didn't respond were excluded as well, but on these bar graphs in the report, they're not listed.
Yeah, so don't knows tend to be excluded at every question. So there's only a very small amount of people that say don't know at each response. So we tend to, as a standard, those respondents are removed from that analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Any further, Jocelyn?
No, thank you.
Okay, I think Councillor Hanford, have you got another question?
Yep. Sorry. I was just looking through the rest of my notes and realised I missed one. On page 258, there's a question there around developing that takes into account the natural environment, and note that we're, 5% or 5 marks below our target. But I'm wondering if in other surveys this happens, or if there's scope to include this in our next resident survey around planning for the climate emergency or taking action to combat and to tackle the climate emergency, because we've got obviously that's I believe that's a really important part of planning and the regulatory environment heading into the future, because we know that time's running out. So I'm just curious to know if there's scope for a question like that within that kind of that section of the survey.
I think it might be a question for Joe.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that question has been continued. Yes.
Could you just What do you mean by that? Sorry, Joe. It's been.
Sorry, Joe, you just muted.
Sorry, I'm muted. Sorry, just not 100%.
Sorry. The same question has been continued. Yeah, so we'll continue to be able to benchmark against that particular one. Absolutely.
Can I just clarify, Joe, because I think Sophie's question was around the possibility of adding a question around, do you want to maybe just restate it, Sophie, so that we can get some clarity?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my question was more around, we do already have that question, and acknowledging that we're asking to seek people's satisfaction on council developing, or the district developing, in a way that takes into account its unique character and natural environment. So that's great. That covers off some of what's needed, I think, to take action on the climate emergency. But in terms of a more specific question about people's satisfaction with council's mahi in the climate space and responding to our climate emergency declaration. So I'm more talking about an additional question that kind of better encompasses, I think, the need to act now on climate change.
And so, Joe, I just correct me if I'm wrong, but is it? Yeah, I think it links back to our KPIs, but it sounds like Wayne might want to have a comment on that. So, over to you, Wayne.
Yeah, that's the point I wanted to go to, Mr. Chair. We've always got to be, so we can think carefully about the words and the commentary that we put behind each question, which can't be too long, but to make sure that people understand what we want to know. We need to be very aware that this survey is too long, and we've been working hard to shorten it because you turn people off. And we need to really avoid the temptation to turn one survey into the survey to rule them all. When we want to know specific information about a specific topic, we should do that separately. This resident satisfaction survey is to inform a lot of things about our LTP and our work program, and is part of setting the LTP. So broadly, we try to avoid getting into the let's do a detailed deep dive into various topics and treat those as standalone pieces of work to inform a specific area. So there's a little bit of scope to make sure we're covering how people feel about our climate response within the satisfaction survey, but we've got to be careful that we don't try and go in too deep in one space when that's not really the purpose of this survey. Hope that helps.
Okay, I'm sorry to cut you off there, Joe. Sophie, did you have anything further to follow up? Noting that we hopefully will have a discussion around this, or we're planning to have a discussion around this at a future date. I don't see any further up on the screen, so I've got a few questions, and if Councillor Halliday or others pop your head up in the meantime, I can come back to you. Liz, thanks for the report. It makes for interesting reading in terms of some of the feedback that's in there. Just bear with me as I scroll through all the different pages. I've got a number of questions, and it's just trying to, in asking the questions, it's not disputing anything within the report. It's trying to get an understanding or context around some of it as well. So just bear with me. In terms of questions like the lighting, poor lighting in different areas, can we tell from the comments the specific areas that are referred to? I think there was some mention around a couple of spots, but can you, in terms of the information that you guys have, can you delve deeper and see more specifics?
So we can look into the ward that those responses are coming from, and see if there's a pattern there. And we can also look into the verbatim comments and see if there's any specific locations that are picked up.
Okay, thank you. And I note throughout the report, there's repeated comments around engagement and communications, generally some negative ones. But equally, when you go down through, there's a couple of other categories there. They're ironically actually listed as good areas as well. So I just wondered how you reconcile that, where it's got sort of saying both sides of it.
Yeah, so there's definitely some positive and negative comments on pretty much every activity area within council. What we look at then is which of those areas are driving satisfaction and the force of the comments that are related to it. So if somebody's saying that they're very dissatisfied and tagging something like community engagement in it, then that is more of something that we take away with than somebody saying that they're satisfied and saying
sure. Okay. And I've just found one there under the main themes of satisfaction was they put a lot in newspapers and communication is open, and they give opportunities for people to meet and discuss issues, which is kind of in contrast to the other findings, but appreciate that's, you know, they are, I guess, verbatim comments that you receive from people. The comment around Kāpiti heading in the right direction, can you give us context into what people, I guess the verbatim comments around that, to give context to that?
Yeah, so there's a whole pile of verbatim comments that it would be worth going through with a kind of fine-tooth comb for those activity areas that are interested. The big ones are the Gateway project and rates. They are the ones that drive the conversation around Capita going in the right direction.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And then just a couple more from me. Sorry, just scrolling down through to my annotated notes. And is there any other councillors that have questions? If you can pop your hand up, because I'm almost done, and then we'll move to the recommendations from there. Can't see any. Under the main and preferred sources of information, I wondered whether, and I'm remembering back to the comments by Chief Executive around the KPIs and what links back to our LTP. So I don't know whether making a change affects that. But under the sources of communication through there, I wondered whether it was possible to include elected members. It'd be interesting to know how much people rely on their elected representatives for that information.
I'll pass to Jo for that one, I think.
Yes, we could certainly talk about that in the workshop, James.
Thanks very much, Jo. Okay, that was all from me. I don't see any further.
We have Councillor Halliday.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Halliday. Surprised you didn't have any questions, Barton. Over to you.
Actually, I'm sort of leaning more towards the workshop, to be honest. Seems to me that we've got a lot to talk about in that space more than anything else. But look, I was just a little bit curious. The rate, obviously, there's two key questions you're talking about there, just based on what Jane was saying. Sorry, not questions. Two drivers being the Gateway or DOE and rates. We've got obviously a high portion of retired people in this community compared to potentially other communities there as well, and potentially a lot on fixed incomes as well. Do you think this is maybe, or is there something that shows whether that has impacted on that perception with regards to rates and how that might be factored into affordability as such?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we have analysed the results by age group as well. We do know that satisfaction amongst that 60+ age group is broadly lower than any other age category. So it could certainly be playing a part.
Cool. No, that's it for me. I'm looking forward to the discussions we have at a workshop, to be honest. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Martin. So look, I don't see any further questions from elected members. So if someone can pop their hand up to move the recommendations on page 20. I think it's got Councillor McCann. Sorry, my screen's jumping around a bit there. Sorry, Councillor McCann, was that you moving?
Councillor McCann and Councillor Holbrook is the second I've got.
Okay, so moved by Councillor McCann, seconded by Councillor Holbrook. Right of introduction, Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce this. I think it's really important that we do take note of what our community is telling us. It's very easy as elected officials for us to think we're making all the right decisions all the time, but it's quite clear that we've somehow got to do a better job of communicating and consulting with our community so that we can increase those results, because it's clear that when we look at the results, there is a disconnect between what we're actually doing and what the public think we're doing. And there are two key exceptions to that, and that are probably around the rates, where people can fundamentally disagree with what we're doing, and also I think the clear decision around the Gateway, where I think one of the things that we have to be really conscious is that there is no place for misinformation when you want to build trust. As councillors, we have to know that when we're debating issues, we should debate on the facts, whether we like them or not. And we should also be calling out the people in our community who create misinformation. You only need to look around the world at the countries where misinformation is being spread the most to see how they're coping under a pandemic, how their countries are coping with contentious issues. I think there's a real plea in the wider world community that if we're going to have these debates, we have them openly and honestly. And no matter what side of an argument you're on, there will always be some facts that don't support your conclusion. That's why making decisions is difficult. I think we also need to really acknowledge that COVID plays a role in people's satisfaction in a survey. There is a level of anxiousness that I really have not experienced in our country since I was a small child, when my generation grew up thinking that the Russians were going to bomb the world and a nuclear war would end it. There are people now who are really scared for what their future entails. So we have to acknowledge it does play a role. So I just think that when we are making these tough decisions, we as elected officials make sure that we're communicating in a really respectful way and communicating with facts and play the issue, not people. And also that we've got to make sure that we are being prudent with people's money, because we are effectively spending their money or booking it up for a rainy day. And that in future, maybe we're going to have to make decisions that where that factor plays a higher role than it has in the past. So I think that's probably enough for me.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Holbrook, you had seconded, but are you speaking in debate? And then I've got Councillor Compton.
Yes, I didn't have much to say. It is, undeniably disappointing that this survey is showing these negative results. Also interesting to note that this isn't unique to Kāpiti at the moment, and also noting that there's a lot of other work going on, including our representation review, including the review of local government as a whole. And so this is really useful information to feed into particularly the latter of those discussions, into the future of local government, because certainly there's something that's either a disconnect or something that we're not doing right at the moment. Social media plays a strong role in this too, and the amount of misinformation in the community. So certainly I look forward to our workshop and how we can work out how we can do things better, how we can communicate better, how we can counter that misinformation in our community and really dig into some of these issues. So thank you for that suggestion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Compton. I think you're up next. And then if other elected members can just pop your hand up, I'm not seeing any further ones.
Thank you. I think this is a hugely valuable report, and I think its elements of its findings echo what I warned this table about 6 months ago when we were debating whether to proceed or not with Te Uruhi. And that's specifically around when we were asking residents to accept significant rates increases over the significant and necessary rates increases over the first 3 years of this long-term plan. Then we needed to be able to demonstrate that we're respecting every dollar of theirs that we're spending, even if it's only, because it was largely CapEx, it only has a small impact on rates. We still needed to be able to demonstrate that. And that's something that I think's flown through. And that's what Liz mentioned in her report as well. And I've worked in comms for a while now, and I've done a lot of work around similar surveys to this and focus groups and that sort of thing. And I know that there is only so far that you can polish the proverbial through better comms and engagement. So for me, the results of this survey are really clear that we need to listen to our community about what their expectations are of us as their elected representatives, and we need to step up and meet those expectations.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other elected members speaking in debate? I can't see any other hands on my screen. Dem Services, can you help me out here?
No, that's all.
All right. So, yeah, look, a little bit from me before we move to putting this to the vote. Certainly from I agree with some of what Gwyn has said in terms of the communications, and there's only so much you can say there. At the fundamental base of it is actually making good decisions, and there'll always be question over those decisions from different segments of the community, because I know some water meters was a classic example where there was a lot of sentiment around those going in, and look now where we've got the community asking us to hold on to our assets from a water perspective, and what a good job Kāpiti has done in that water space, and that it doesn't need to be lumped into a massive big entity. Yet you wouldn't be hard pressed to find comments online and social media that paint a different picture around the management of our water there over the last few years that aren't necessarily true. So that being said, I don't think we should ignore what we see in the report, and I think the danger for any organisation, not just the council, when you receive something like this, is always to try and find excuses to justify particular reductions or so forth. So I think hence why I raised the matter with our chief executive around having a bit more of a deep dive in the not too distant future, and looking into the issues, I guess validating some of them, and also looking at potential solutions. Probably the most classic example in the past has been footpaths, where we've had poor results and increased the budget significantly, over 50%, partly due to the fact of waka kotahi funding, that hopefully over time we'll see a lift in that satisfaction in the footpath area that previously ranked low. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand it back to Councillor McCann for a right of reply, and then we'll put that to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think I have anything to add other than to say that I agree with what my fellow councillors have said, and I think that this provides us with a real indication of what the community thinks, and we need to change that trajectory, and we need to do it together. There is no way in which we can ensure that the trust of the community is held by the Capita Coast District Council if we are unable to debate and engage in a respectful way with our community. So I think we hold that mantle, and I would like to recommend that we accept the recommendation to accept this
Thank
report.
you. So recommendation 20, found on page 254.
For you, Mr. Chair, we just have Councillor Elliott that just would like the recommendation popped up on screen, so I'm just going to pop it up now.
Thank you. While you're doing that, I'll read it out. The recommendation is that the Strategy and Operations Committee note the Residents' Opinion Survey annual results for 2020-2021 as attached as Appendix A to the report. Moved by Councillor McCann, seconded by Councillor Holborough. So we put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Against.
And we have 10 votes in favour.
Votes, and that is passed. Before we move on to the next item, I just want to make a comment in terms of the results from the survey. So in light of the results from the Residents' Opinion Survey, I'm requesting that the Chief Executive bring a report to the Strategy and Operations Committee on establishing a communications and social media policy for elected members. So I've raised it with the Chief Executive, and he will be following that up. So move on to the next item. Just bear with me as I scroll down. Almost there, team. And we are now, and sorry, Liz, thank you. Sorry if I've lost Liz already, but thank you for walking us through that presentation, and also Joe. And we are now on to item number 8.5, contracts under delegated authority, found on page 315. And if staff could just talk us through that report. Page 315, contracts under delegated authority. We got your team?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. I can just, if I can take the report as read, and I think there's two contracts there. One was for the Remy Road safety improvements, and the other one was for the an extension of the current road maintenance contract with Higgins, who've been performing extremely well. So we didn't see any reason to not extend that contract for a further 2 years, which was allowed for within the contract itself.
Thank you, Sean. So recommendation 12 on page 315. Team, any questions coming out of the report? I can't see any hands. Does someone want to move the recommendation? I can only see 4 elected members just with the current screen layout. So I think
Sophie Hanford and Gwyn Compton.
Okay, moved by Councillor Hanford, seconded by Councillor Compton. Right of introduction, Councillor Hanford, or is that waived? I'm just going to assume that it's waived, unless I hear otherwise. She's fine, excellent. So open it up for debate. Pop your hands up if there is any debate on this matter. Don't see any, so I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Tick your green box.
So we have 10 votes in favour.
Excellent. And that is passed. All right. Now on to page 317, confirmation of minutes for the meeting of the 5th of August. Is there any matters relating to the 5th of August minutes that members want to raise? Or does someone want to move the minutes as being? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just querying the fact that under present is a list of names, and then I had contacted and notified the meeting that I would be late, but I'm not showing, I'm still showing as not present, even though I arrived at 10:20 something. Is that normal process?
I'm not sure. Let's check with Dem Services.
No, we'll go back and check. You should have been noted for lateness, and then your time at arriving in the meeting should have been noted. So we'll go back and have a look at that.
Oh, okay, it is noted. It's just that I'm still showing as absent.
We'll make
okay,
it.
so
yeah, so just querying that anyway.
Thanks, Councillor. Staff will follow up on that. Councillor Randall, welcome. Oh, you're just muted at the moment, Bernie.
I'd like to move that the minutes be accepted.
Oh, thank you, Councillor. Do we have a seconder? Someone like to second that? We can get those passed.
Was that Councillor Halliday or
Councillor Halliday? Thank you. Moved by Councillor Randall, seconded by Councillor Halliday. I'm assuming there's no right of intro. I'm going to put that to the vote. If everyone can tick their voting boxes, all those in favour. And that looks like it's passed at my end.
10 votes in favour.
Excellent. And just flicking back, and I think that is it. Just double checking with you, Tanika, there's nothing further we need to cover?
No, the business has been concluded. Excellent.
Look, well done, team. We got through that. Hopefully everyone felt they had an opportunity to participate on the things that mattered to them. Appreciate staff's involvement. Definitely interesting doing this by Zoom with a meaty agenda. Thanks, Janet, for your thanks. And so thanks everyone for attending. Councillor Elliott, I see your hand is up. I just want to double check.
Mr. Chair, just a query. On the item of the customer satisfaction report, you made some very pertinent and important comments right at the end after voting, or just at voting. that you'd had a discussion with the CE about possibly writing up a policy. I'm hoping that those comments you've made are recorded somewhere in the minute, because it didn't go to the vote, so it's not a resolution. So just clearing.
Yeah, so just to clarify that, it's not a resolution. As chair of the committee, I can request a report to come to the strategy and operations, and rather than doing that offline, I felt it was more open to do that during the course of the meeting. It relates back to the residents' opinion survey. We can touch on that in any future workshop. However, it's now over to the chief executive to bring that back through to the committee. And so, if I could clarify, what won't be brought back to the committee is the policy. What will be brought back is a paper on developing a policy around communications and social media for elected members. So hopefully that's clear for everyone. Excellent.
Thank you.
I'm going to call the meeting to a close. Thanks everyone for their participation, and we'll see you again for the extraordinary meeting at 1:30, I think. Thanks, team. Thanks, Tanika and Grayson.
Thank you.
You guys are awesome.
Welcome. All right, T, I'll just stop